and welcome back. And we'll pick right up from where we left off. You know, we left with Anne's naked hour, which is what we used to call it. The idea of being, you know, caught a little bit embarrassed maybe about things, maybe a little uncomfortable, and then exploring that discomfort, right? These emotions are for reasons. We don't have them for nothing. So we should feel a little bit more comfortable. Men, we have trouble with this, okay? Because the way we're taught, and I wanted to. I'll be talking about that when I get into children, because we get kind of screwed around, men and women both, because of the way things are shaped and the way our lives are largely formed through belief systems that don't really represent truth in the sense of foundational sort of facts, like that's solid, like this is really a cup of coffee. You know, those are facts we can all identify with. Now, is it a good cup of coffee? Well, that's another question, right? That would be a belief, depends on what you thought and what you felt about it, but it's not necessarily a fact. So there's a lot of things we observe or we think we know that aren't necessarily facts. I use an example often of if you're a woman in Saudi Arabia and you're dressed in a full covering, a Muslim covering, you might be a very happy woman in that covering. And then you might be a woman in France walking down the beach with no top on and feel perfectly fine with no covering. And then you might be a woman in Iowa in the Midwest thinking about those two women going, man, I don't know what's wrong with those women. I like my house dress. Well, who's right? All of them. They're all right in terms of their belief systems within the context that they're living. The facts that are the same is they're all women. Beyond that, they're all human. Beyond that, maybe not so much. But a lot of what we consider about what's important really aren't facts. They're more about beliefs and judgments and lots of things that we should consider. So the two judges, I want to hit that one more time, because this is, again, it's about your path, about you being the individual that you want to ignite. So the relationship in terms of that is between you and yourself and your judgments, and then what you do working through those. And with the Creator, whatever you judge that to be, and how that might work out at the end. Because this is kind of how I look at time. You know, I mentioned before, you know, this is like really valuable, the time we have here. In that last few minutes of time, and I'll talk about that last few minutes through the eyes of a friend of mine who's a hospice nurse. But when you get up to the end of that last few minutes is worth probably $1 million to everybody. You'd give $1 million for just one more minute. And then when you jump to the other side, if you believe like I do, now you got eternity where time has no value whatsoever. Wow. So you go from totally valuable to totally not valuable, because there's an abundance of time on the other side of this equation. Assuming I'm correct in that, science is correct in that we're mainly consciousness and not a physical form, then I'm correct. So I'm willing to bet on eternity and then fill this dance card pretty full, and look at how I live my life, because I think that's important. Because in other dimensions, the multiverse, which I'll discuss later, this idea that we could probably live maybe within a lot of other frameworks simultaneously, just our bandwidth doesn't perceive it. And then we go to sleep at night, and then we sort of jump out of the physical body in a certain way, and our bandwidth expands in a different direction across that multiverse. And this is explained again in the big thinkers in quantum physics, the multiverse. But your soul, your path is your deal. What I want to talk about next is the power of words and emotions and choice as it relates to levels of existence. And so this, again, dealing with the individual. The words, what are words anyway? They're symbols for ideas. Like if I say the word apple, some people in the audience will think about a little piece of fruit. Others will think of a tree, others will think of a pie, and others will think of the American way, you know, depending on what that symbol, apple pie, means to you. So when you think about words as symbols for thought, boy, you can see why communication gets messed up in a hurry, you know, because you're transferring ideas by stringing words together to get someone else to see the same picture. And that's based on a lot of assumptions, you know, about what a person's experienced and how they might see the picture. And so it kind of explains why you thought, I know I said this, but they didn't hear that, kind of works out, of why that works out, the word symbols. I think communication's deeper as well. People will talk about the nonverbal, like body language, hand motion, tone, all that. And that's all true. It gives you a lot of information. But I believe there's also another bit that gets carried on this. We'll explain more about that later, but I believe that a lot of it, most of the information doesn't carry on the words at all. It's either on submodulations, where thought gets transferred in a different kind of way than we think about, where it comes in to your unconscious and works its way around there. But the is an artificial construct in my view. We put it there and now it limits because it's there. A lot of things limit, and I'll talk about those because words aren't by accident. When you use a word and you combine a word with emotion and intent, this is how creation forms, is this way, because this is how things happen in the world. People get ideas, they attach it with enthusiasm and energy, and then they have intention, and they go out and start doing things. It's the essence of it. But all of that stuff that we're talking about there is stuff you can't touch. You can't touch thoughts, and you can't touch emotion, you can't touch passion, you can't touch any of that. But it's the fuel. So as I go into this, I want to talk about 3 levels of existence, if you will. The physical I started to allude to earlier, and now we're in the, sort of this middle space of mind, consciousness, touch. We can't touch it, right? It's the most important thing that we can't touch. Think about where we are in our culture today. COVID, something we can't see, has locked us up in our houses in a way that we can't move. But things we don't see and can't touch really do have an impact on us. And so the physical is the obvious. This is where we start to get to the middle space, because this moves us either physically, this way, or connects us to something else in terms of consciousness that way. So when I think about it, it's the middle place. You can go either direction. And what usually happens in the world, as I see it, is we come out of our survival part, the part that when the lion jumps out, you jump and run. That kind of reflex action that kicks the adrenals and puts you into an energy zip. And then intuition even plays out a little bit here. This is where you kind of get the pre-notice that the lion's out there somewhere. So you're already backing away as the person that's not quite so intuitive gets eaten, because he's the one that lagged behind. So that part of the brain's important, but in the 21st century, where we're not going to need to jump very often unless it's jumping out of the way of a car about to run us over, but most of the time, the adrenals don't need to be involved, and yet we get these jolts into emergency that really start to use parts of the brain and reflex actions that don't fit very well when you need careful, thoughtful, reasoned approaches. And one of the big things that distorts that is anxiety, fear. These things actually create in the brain incoherent brain patterns that can be noticed, and we'll talk about those later, that are exactly the opposite of those associated with higher ordered thinking, whether it be intellectual work or art, or when you're in your zone as an athlete, this kind of special type of, and you know what I'm talking about, because everyone thinks for a moment, oh yeah, I know that space. I can visualize that in my head, because we all have those moments. That's when you start to dial into something a bit different. And this is what I would say, again, as a way to kind of segregate them. Think about that body, that physical form, that little baby, and every cell every 7 years. And the baby is basically impulse driven, the body, to survive. It eats, it goes to the bathroom, it survives, it hollers, it wants to be comfortable. And the body is signaling that child who screams and knows that now it can scream and make noise. But the body is the one creating the discomfort for the entity that is in it. And so that's something to remember, is how is that really happening? And then what's happening with that baby? Well, as it begins to self-identify and then begins to know faces and feeling around it because of what provides the safety, right? Food, clothing, shelter, safety, security. Remember Maslow's hierarchy even applies to little babies. Belongingness to a family, self-actualization for a baby. What is that? Now this is interesting as a model. It's whatever the parents say, whatever the culture dictates. Because now we start layering up this entity, this human soul, with what they're going to be. Oh, you're this, and you do this, and you're this way, and you're that way, and you're this and that, you're this and that and that and this. Then we send them to school, and then more people tell them what they are and what they're not, and they learn about that. And so all their life they're told what they are and what they're not by other people telling them what they are and what they're not. And most of it's just beliefs. Most of it's not facts. It's cultural belief. It's governmental belief. It's part of your tribal belief. It's whatever it is you're believing. Is it right? Yes. Within the cultural context that you're in, perfect. It's absolutely perfect. It's the environment in which you're going to do your path, at least the one you're starting in, and it's going to take you somewhere. And at the end, hopefully, you'll find your way back to what is your garden, your place of creativity again. And that's really this idea of bringing the physical, which wants to live and wants to survive, to subordinate a bit and do what it's here to do, serve the soul that lives in it. That's what it's supposed to do. Energy management, breath, movement, I want to talk a little bit about that, because energy management, how do we manage energy in the physical form? What do people do? Well, I manage my energy a little bit with coffee. That's energy management. That's called caffeine. Others use all kinds of drugs and alcohol to manage their energy system. Different ways. Foods are energy management systems. All foods are. What do you eat? You know, are you eating sugars and carbs, which are highly addictive, and it tends to, the body will crave what it's addicted to. Sugar is the most addictive substance on the planet. You know, it's worse than tobacco, worse than anything. And we're all addicted if we're in the West. So it's like, okay, is that healthy? Well, it's primarily causes cardiovascular diseases of every kind, tooth decay. It causes all kinds of physiological problems, enhances cancer environments. We see the results of that. I mean, all of the stuff we do is really about energy management. The body wants to live. When you think about drugs and alcohol, again, energy management. Sex is energy management. It really is. And it's creative energy that everybody gets a big charge of, can get a sense of, and is abused the most in terms of energetically, creating the most damage. Look at the Catholic Church. 2,000 years of damage there, and they're not alone. Look at any of these religious organizations, or any organization that has children involved, and there's abusers there. Lots of them, too many of them. You know, it's like the garden for really evil people. So, you know, looking at some of this in terms of flesh and what it does, that the body does, and its addictions, but if you can remember, it's a carrier for your soul, and it needs to subordinate. And I'm going to talk about that, ways to help do that, figure that out. But that's part of that battle that all religious doctrine talks about, the battles against the flesh, the battles against the body. It's really making this body do what it's supposed to do, serve your higher self, not run the programming because it needs to live. Once it realizes what it's supposed to do, it will do it better. But that's the next level, the mental and emotional. You can't hold or touch it. There's always the two questions now when we get into the mental emotional. What do you think? What do you think? Which is a left-hand function, a left brain function. And what do you believe? Which is a right brain function, an emotional function. These two are the two questions that bring left and right together, male and female concepts together, heart and head concepts together, and we'll explore those more later. But this is emotion and mind. This is why there's power here. This is the place where it's energetically going down or going up. Now what happens for most people, they're living in survival, flesh. I gotta live, I gotta make it, I gotta get my budget, I gotta worry about my money. It's survival, that's all about survival. It's understandable, that's what the body wants to do. It's telling the mind, hey, I need to eat, I need this, that. It's worrying about everything. How many things do you fear all the time and they never happen? If you live long enough, you'll discover 99% of things you feared never happened, never were gonna happen, but you wasted an awful lot of energy about that. either getting ready for it or getting unprepared for it, whatever your deal was. But again, the mental processing, and this, think about everything at this level, and this is the important piece of this. Everything at this level deals with all of your emotions, all of your thought, whether your consciousness is on or not, doesn't matter, it's going to come in later. But it's all your thought, all of your emotion, all of your humor and all of your pain. And while I'm there, I want to talk about that for a moment. Robin Williams, everybody remembers him. He was a funny man, really a funny man, who committed suicide at the end, and no one really understood that. And I would say this about that. I've seen a lot of people in my lifetime mask total despair under happiness. They look happy to everybody around them, and then you hear the story. And here's what I know. Don't mask. Yeah, I mean, you have to be light about it, for sure, when you're suffering a little bit. But don't not let someone know you're suffering. There's got to be someone out there that can at least help you in those moments if you're not able to do it, and not running from it. And too many people have, and they mask it all day long, or they always answer the same way, right? How you doing? Fine, when they really need about an hour of your time to tell you the truth. Don't let them get away with it, because you know it. You know it too, when someone close to you has something else going on, but you let it go. You don't say, oh, wait a minute. That isn't the truth, is it? When you know it, because you heard it and you didn't do it. These are the things that I want to hopefully teach, that we listen to what our hearts are telling us, what that little voice in the head, or whatever, however you describe it, that we begin to act on those voices, not just the voice of fear, but we begin to act on the voice of courage by recognizing what we are as human beings first, and then having the courage to know that it isn't courage at all. It's just stepping into what you are and who you are. It doesn't require anything but remembering. And this is my big hidden message is, you don't have to evolve to anything. And anyone who uses that phrase, I'll use it occasionally just as an illustration, but we don't have to evolve at all. We have to remember. That's it. We have to drop veils and remember what we are. Most have been conditioned by people telling us what we are from the time we're born. And then we have to go into this search to figure out what is true. And it's difficult to sort it out. But what I would say is the middle place and below, I would call, for illustration purposes here, let's just call that the storage system of experience. Let's call that the ego, if you will. And not the kind of ego that everybody thinks about, of somebody saying, oh, I'm the greatest, I'm the best, that kind of egotistical behavior. Let's talk about the ego as the part of you that stores all your experiences and all your information and all the ways you feel about it. Your data storage, like on a computer, it's your storage, it's your memory, it's where it all is. Now, on one part of the world, in a calculation, resulted in a big change on the other parts of the world. And it was equated to a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the earth and creating a hurricane on the other side, the butterfly effect. And so how does that translate into our lives? It means that the very small things that we classify as small things somehow create big outcomes. And now we think about the world and we think, oh, but there's all these bigger things. Now take a universal view of this. There's nothing in this world that's big at all from a universal perspective. Nothing. I don't care what it is. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it is. It's all small stuff, period. It is. It really is. But it isn't to you individually, and it isn't to the creation at all. Just, it's kind of this weirdness. On one hand, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, it totally matters. Because within this, you're still that hologram. You're still the whole of creation within you, so it matters. It's kind of like your creation is your baby, all right? It's the metaphor of creation, creating the image and likeness of God. He has his babies, that's all of us and everything else. And then we have ours within the creation that we do as individuals. But most of us do it with only the storage system of experience operating and the disconnects that cut us off from communication here. the knowledge of good and evil, I would say, was the big one. Because here it is. What keeps you from doing something? What keeps you depressed is you and your choices about you and how you feel about it. And so again, it's like we've been lied to and told we're powerless by every institution out there, that we have to have groupthink, we have to stand in the little box, we have to do what we're told. Yeah, there's order, there's respect. I've talked about all that. But it was to be there in the essence of liberty and freedom, not with a bunch of regulations and rules that make it impossible to function. You don't even know what the rules are, and they tell you you have to, and it covers 3 floors of a library, and that's called the law library. 3 floors of a big building, and you're supposed to know all that? That's not justice. That's not living free. That's a shackle of rules that's way too big for the common man and common sense. But we built it, and there's reasons. We'll get into that. We'll get into how to reassemble it. I also want to talk to you about the power of the small in this. The widow's mite, which was a gift given given as a gift. Small gift worth a penny. And then, oh, that's nothing. Oh no, the bigger gift was the widow's mite, not the wealthy man's deal. And the deal was, it takes more for a wealthy man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle, is the way that statement went. And what does that really mean? It means the more complicated your life is the way I see it, and the more stuff you have in the way in the material, the less opportunity is to see the spiritual. And I think that's true. I think the simpler things are, the easier it is to see what's important. The further you get away from all of what man creates, like everything you see in this room except for the plants and the living people, when you get closer to what is really created in God's outpouring, it does anchor you and reconnect you, and something that we need to do more of. And we used to all be this way. Most of us were agricultural peoples a little over 100 years ago. People were in the earth, touching the earth, connected to things, not lost in cities with no connection whatsoever. So how can you possibly be a steward of a planet you can't even touch anymore? So it's rethinking sort of how we've done this, maybe looking a little differently. And I don't think we're doing this correctly either out of shortage. I think we should be functioning out of abundance, and we'll talk a lot about that as we go on. The ego is tricky. Each of us has an ego equal to our awareness. It's just as smart as you are to keep you running in fear and anger and all that stuff. And a quick way to see it is, if it's emotional and it's dragging you somewhere, definitely stop, pay attention, even if it's love, even if it's empathy, because it can take you places too. It can take you places too. Make sure the emotions, remember that's the energy that fuels your thought. That is the ingredients that create reality. So don't spend your empathy in a way that doesn't change something. You take those emotions now and you form them with thought to go create something. Don't wallow in empathy and grief or whatever that might turn into. That's not empathy anymore. So pay close attention to what you're doing with the emotions. Don't let the emotions be the experience. They're only half. The other half's the thought that goes with them. It works both ways. Thoughts without emotions, pretty powerless. Emotions without thoughts, they don't go anywhere. You need the 2 ingredients. This is part of the big lie. Why women are always emotional and men are always intellectual. It's because of the shaping that happened early. It's not how we started. We had balanced brains as young children. We lost them as we gained education. And then we got typeset into performing a half a function. So we weren't functioning properly. And then we form unions where you're trying to create a full function out of a union, when you should have 2 fully functional humans coming into union, so you get the maximum things that come from union. And that's where we're going to be heading in the next sections. You know, when you talk about listening and thinking about what you're hearing, you can hear a lot through the head, and that's intellectual thinking, you know, as we think about it. And then you can feel a lot through the heart, which we think is just feeling and somehow isn't connected to the brain. These 2 things go together. They're hemispheres. We're going to talk about the brain. We're going to break that down today and talk about that. But the last couple of things I want to mention as we kind of move out of the self and into other relationships is the idea that once you're fully informed on who you are and you've decided what you really truly believe and where you have deficits, where you want to learn, where you've decided to apply yourself to learn, to fulfill your curiosity. And then you begin to construct a life, and we're going to talk about ways to do that. And we're going to get into all the other issues I've covered in the past. We're going to get into the alternative energy, we're going to get into the HARP stuff, weather modification, all of those things, government. But we're starting to give you your power back, because nothing's going to change in this world until individuals have their power back. We spent the entire morning to give you a context of how I found mine and how you can find yours. And in the context of what, in my region of the world, I come from a powerful family, and I can say that. And that's not about ego, that's about reality on the ground. And my family is conservative as hell on one side and as liberal as hell on the other, you know, on both extremes in this state. And we get things done because one thing is for sure: we respect each other, and we respect the baseline values that make us uniquely different. When we get together at Christmas, it's a debate like you've never seen. But at the end of the day, it's love like you've never seen. Coming out of that same room in those same hours. That's the power that built this nation. That's the power that builds individuals. And that's what made life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness possible. When we get back from this short break, we're going to talk about relationships. We're going to talk about love. We're going to move from that into the metaphor of enlightenment, if you will. Then we're going to talk about children. We're going to talk about the educational model that's failing us. And I'm going to present an alternative model for education that every parent listening needs to hear. And everybody paying taxes for education, which is everybody else, needs to hear. We're all being ripped off with education right now, not just public, but private too. And that can change. People need knowledge. Knowledge is power, and power, the kind of power that leads to wisdom. By the grace of God, we need a better system, because what we've got now is failing. So individuals to be powerful, it's all about the things we're going to cover today. But then we're going to talk about our government. We're going to talk about the institutions that we've trusted and how to rebuild those institutions so by the people, of the people, and for the people is real again. We'll be right back.